Now, former Exxaro coal miners want to be compensated after contracting lung diseases while working at the mine. The miners are represented by Richard Spoor Inc, who previously initiated class actions against the South 32 Group, BHP Billiton and Seriti Power, as well as Anglo-American Group. Chloe Hoffman is an associate with Richard Spoor Inc and joins us now. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time. This is the third of your series of class actions against coal mining companies. How does this case now differ or perhaps have similarities to the others that you've taken on?
Well, thanks for having me. You are spot on. This is a third class action in a series of 4 class actions. As you mentioned, the previous are against South 32 Group and the Anglo Group, and this is the third Exxaro Group. Effectively, the causes of action, our prompt to arrive before the court is the same. The things that are significantly different in the papers are, of course, the descriptions of the respondents, the mining companies themselves, and our applicants, the mine workers who worked at each of these companies. However, the causes of action themselves are the same. We are pursuing the mine companies on the basis of negligent performance of their duty to provide a safe working environment for their mine workers, which has culminated in very serious lung diseases.
You've essentially just given us some background on what will form the legal basis of your argument. How have mining companies reacted? It's still very early on in the process, Mpo, so there isn't too much that we can tell you about how the respondents are reacting to the papers. With South 32 and Anglo, which is a little bit further along than Exxaro, we have received notices of intentions to oppose our application for certification of the class actions. Effectively, this means that they are opposing, they argue with our mechanism of using a class action to pursue compensation on behalf of the mine workers. So effectively, are defending the application. Yeah. So with Exxaro being the latest company now to face this class action for the allegations, put forward, failing to implement the necessary safety environment and measures to protect the coal miners, and this being, the third case, or perhaps a fourth, that you're now taking on, what does this now tell us about the kind of environment that the South African mining coal industry operates in? What are we learning from this, on top of the many other challenges that are being faced, like the ongoing strikes and the possibility of job cuts in the future? Yes. So, Mpo, if I'm being quite frank, our consultations with the mine workers are devastating. Their stories of working underground, sometimes up to 11 kilometers underground, extreme heat, but of course of predominant concern to us is the exposure to dust levels. There are occupational exposure limits that the mines are obligated to comply with, but we have seen across the board that these limits have not been complied with. Although there have been attempts to provide some protections to mine workers, they certainly have not been sufficient. If I can give you an example, dust masks are a predominant sort of protection provided to mine workers to protect their lungs from the dust. But we hear countless and countless stories about how these mine workers are given 1 dust mask per day, sometimes 1 dust mask per week. You can just imagine being underground, extreme heat. There's so much dust underground that you can barely see yourself, let alone the person in front of you, and you're given 1 dust mask. You're not able to breathe through it after you've been wearing it for a couple of hours. You are sweating because it's so hot underground, so the mask is getting wet and the dust is sticking to the mask. It is just, they really are atrocious working environments. It's incredibly difficult. Of course, the mining environment in and of itself is a dangerous, risky work, but we just find that the protections that are available that should be given to these mine workers, they're not being complied with. Production profits are being preferred over the protections that should be provided to these mine workers. There is, of course, training that is a requirement. Mine workers are supposed to be given training which explains to them the severe and very real risks of diseases being contracted under mines. We find that these are effectively tick box exercises. The mine workers don't really understand the impacts that the dust that they're experiencing underground is having on them, and it only comes to sort of several years after they've retired or left the mine that they start to experience these very, very serious symptoms, and they start to understand what they were exposed to while they were working underground.
Is it a matter of policy not being affected or regulation when it comes to the penalties that should be imposed on mines for failing to comply with the safety measures? I mean, what you're describing is really heart-wrenching to listen to, especially looking at then what happens to the mine workers who cannot work and who are affected by this chronic disease.
Paul, it is effectively a combination of both. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the mining companies do have health and safety procedures in place, but the legislation is formed in such a way that it is supposed to be a progressive implementation of these protections. The more you learn, the better you do. And we just don't find that where they're learning more, they're not doing any better. They're providing the bare minimum, and where there should be sort of progression in policies, there should be further steps being taken in light of the information that we have in 2023, in light of the dangers that we now know dust-exposed mine workers to. There has just been not enough development, not enough acknowledgement of the impact that the dust has on the mine workers' bodies, and still a continued preference to profit.
So what are you hoping to achieve as you take this case on?
So, as I've described, our mine workers that we are representing are incredibly ill. Many have come to the point where they've been suffering with these diseases for numbers of years, and they don't have access to the necessary medical intervention, such as oxygen tanks, such as the very ordinary things that would treat these types of illnesses. So the first goal of our litigation is to provide some sort of justice, some type of financial compensation to the employees who have contracted these illnesses while working underground. The second is, of course, looking forward, an attempt to focus on how we can better the protections that are going to be implemented underground. We want to have a lasting impact on the mining operations and the worker protections they implement. We want the mines to know that we're watching and that South Africa is watching and that they need to do better.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. We're going to have to leave it there for now. Chloe Hoffman, Associate at Richard Spoor Incorporated, there speaking about this third in a series of class actions against coal mining companies.